Hi, I'm Gary Zacharias, founder of Apologetics for Life Ministry and a California Community College English professor. Welcome to our show. We call it Christian Apologetics, Defending the Faith. We try to present every week a reason why we think Christianity is true. Maybe you've had questions, maybe friends of yours have had questions. We're hoping that this is the show that answers those. Please feel free to go to our website, that's apologeticsforlife.org. You can find more information about us and a co-sponsor, Blackstone University. Blackstone is a proposed school. There'll be a law school, a graduate school, and a school for international human rights. And the purpose of Blackstone is to equip students to go out into the world and deal with the truth claims of Christianity. So please go there for more information. And meantime, I hope you enjoy this presentation that we have. Keep in mind we've had to shorten it a little bit to fit the time constraints here, but if you want to see the entire video, you can go to the website. Thank you.
So let's start with where the whole thing takes place. It's called the Ancient Near East, sometimes abbreviated ANE. And you'll probably recognize, if you don't recognize these places, you'll probably recognize the modern places to be Turkey. Right, does that look familiar? Israel will be down here. You got Iraq over there. Egypt. Isn't that interesting? That's got to be one of the oldest surviving countries in the history of the world, don't you think? I haven't checked to see how long China has been China, but I mean, as long as you can go back, there's been Egypt, right? It's always anchored that corner down here. So we got Africa down here, we got Europe up here, and of course Russia and all up that way. So Persian Gulf, which has played a pretty prominent role as the oil has been flowing back and forth. But if you take a look, this over in the red there, it says Mesopotamia. It's a fancy word, it just means between the rivers. What are the two rivers that are the biggies? Tigris and Euphrates. And again, unfortunately, they've been in the news as our troops have gone through that area. But they come up this way and then water this area and then come down to the Persian Gulf. So those are the big rivers. For a long time, the Hittites here, we had no historical information about the Hittites outside the Bible. It just, in the Old Testament, it talked about the Hittite Empire. And so people who were cynics and skeptics said, oh, come on, it's in the Bible. They probably didn't even exist. It was just a bunch of fairy tales. And then 100 years ago, they dug up the Hittite Empire. That's a surprise. The Bible had it right. The land of Canaan down here, the Mediterranean in this area, and Egypt, of course, down at the bottom. If you notice something, it looks like the empires tend to go up this way, and then they come down along the coast on into Egypt, like an upside-down U. That's called the Fertile Crescent. I don't know if you ever heard that reference, because it does look like a crescent kind of on edge there. Notice there's not much going on in between these areas. You know why, right? Who's going to live out there, right? It's just dry as can be. It's all desert this way. So if you wanted to travel, you didn't travel this way. You would come up this way and down this way. This is the major artery for the two empires. You get somebody over here would get big every once in a while, right? That's the Mesopotamian area. Different empires would come along, and then you'd have Egypt down here. So you have these two great big empires. Sometimes they were strong, sometimes they'd be weak, right? It would always be kind of a back and forth thing. And if they wanted to fight each other, guess where they would come? Canaan was in between. And so for years and years and years, as you read through the Old Testament, you're going to read about somebody getting big over here and coming over and challenging the Egyptians, or the Egyptians getting powerful, and they come up the coast here and strike anybody that could cause them problems. So here's the poor little shuttlecock in the way here, right, getting batted back and forth. So many times you'll find some kind of empire comes over here and says, which side are you on? Oh, you have to think, and you have to think very carefully. If it's, for example, the Babylonians come over here, and they say, which side are you on? You think about, well, how strong is Egypt right now? And if you guess wrong, you're in big trouble, right? Because they just stomp you on the ground. So you'd have to be very careful. This poor little land suffered greatly because of these two empires, back and forth and back and forth. And we'll talk about the empires a little bit later. Any questions about the map or just the general location for some of this?
Neither Israel nor Poland have had the opportunity that Switzerland had of having the mountains to protect them.
Yeah.
They've been able to be neutral for centuries, really.
Yeah.
And you get those flat places and you get marched over
Yeah.
all the time.
Oh, yeah. Exactly right. Yeah, nothing protects them geographically down here from that empire or that empire. Let's start in the Torah then, right? The 5 books of Moses. In Genesis, we're introduced to God, and most of us say, "Isn't that nice? Good, glad God created everything." But if you slow down for just a second and think about the kind of God that's revealed in the book of Genesis compared to the other gods all over the world, there are lots of differences, and our God is such an amazingly different God. He was above nature, wasn't he? He creates nature, and many of the other gods are created somehow, but nature was there first, and they don't really control nature. I mean, we have a God that's above the storms. We have a God that's above the rain. We have a God that's above the earthquakes, right? He takes care of the world. A singular God compared to the many. It's always chaotic, isn't it? When you read about the Greek gods, they argue with each other, and it's chaos, right? They're not in control of anything. And there's a whole bunch of them running around, getting in each other's way. He's a careful creator. How many times does he say it is good? It's good. It's turned out the way he wanted it to. God's the master craftsman in the book of Genesis. Not so other places. It's a world that comes into existence and it's chaotic and nobody can control it and everybody's running around like crazy. Our God is an ethical God as revealed in Genesis. He punishes sin. He's unhappy about certain things. But look at the gods, especially, I always think of the Greek gods, I guess. I think I grew up on them more than any other group. What kind of gods do you get there? They're lustful, they're jealous, they're petty, they try to harass each other. Remember the Iliad and the Odyssey? I don't know if you read any of those. They have their favorites. If you're a woman, look out, because one of the gods was always trying to rape you. I mean, it's just an awful, awful thing. They're like, I don't know, teenagers with, full of testosterone and stuff. It's just, they're nuts, He can't be manipulated, can he? The God that's revealed in the Bible. Compare that to the gods, other places where you have to do incantations and you've got to cut yourselves. Remember the story of Baal and the worship of Baal, and there's Elijah on Mount Carmel, and he's saying, keep going, guys. Maybe your God will come too if you just do something else. And they got all these things they're doing to themselves, trying to wake up their God. But that's the kind of God that's revealed. It's a very different God than you see in all these other documents that you read about other. Let's move along then, it's still in Genesis, but let's consider the movement of Abraham. This arrow represents the direction that he took. Does that again look like a fertile crescent move? And so all he's doing is following that traditional pattern that a lot of people did. He was not the only one to do this, but he's moving from down here close to Babylon and all that area and up to Haran, and he gets the message from God, go down to Canaan. I don't think we appreciate what that message was and his reaction to that. I mean, what if you wake up someday and God tells you to go to El Centro? I hate to pick on El Centro. I don't know, maybe I should think Needles, Blythe. Right? And we'd say, oh, I'm going to leave the beauty. I'm going to leave culture. I'm going to leave, you're patting her. We got a, Jan, are you from that area?
Pardon me?
Are you from that area?
No.
Oh, okay. I don't mean, I'm not picking on anybody here.
We're coming up with towns that are just carbon copies of each other.
No, okay. But I mean, the idea is you would probably go with real hesitant steps, wouldn't you? To say, I got to leave everything I like here. I got to leave culture. I got to leave doctors. I got to leave all these wonderful things to go where? And so for him to come down here, there was nothing here. Remember, the civilizations are here or they're over here, but they're not here. This is terrible. This is a bad area to go. But talk about faith. He says, okay, I'm going to leave these wonderful places that I've been at where I can really flourish, and I'm going to go out there. And that's a great step of faith, not just moving, but moving to some place that's as out of it as this would have been for him. This is something that's just starting to be discovered in the last, let's say, 20 years or so. As we move into the last part of Genesis, you know the story. There's a famine, and the people come down to Egypt. The Israelites come down to Egypt, and then they settle there. And everything's great for a while, and then Exodus starts off saying, a Pharaoh comes along, and he didn't know the children of Israel anymore, right? There's a disconnect that happens at that point. So people look at these stories, and they say, well, those are nice stories, but do you have any evidence that the Jews were ever in that land? Yeah, they're actually doing some work now. archaeological work. So I don't have time to do a ton of these things, but I just want you to give you an idea that even though we're talking, thousands of years ago, evidence is starting to be found. There's a place, and I'll show you where it is. My grandmother used to say land of Goshen. Right? Okay, there is a land of Goshen, right? I'll show you a map in just a second. But it's near the mouth of the Nile River. It's an area called Goshen. So what are they starting to find in Goshen? They're starting to find things that look Canaanite, not Egyptian, in this one area. Now, it doesn't say specifically these are Israelite structures, but they're finding pottery and architecture and things that are not Egyptian in this one area, as if some kind of group of people settled there. So we can't say for sure, but I think that's intriguing. They have wall paintings that show all sorts of nomadic traders, or a lot of trading that went on during this time period, roughly the time of the Israelites coming in. And you can tell definitely these are Semitic people. There's an inscription about Eastern people, right? That would be people from the land of Canaan, who didn't worship Ra. How about this? They have found lists of slave names from Hebrew records, and the slave names are Semitic. And they're Hebrew, more specific. Hebrew names in Egypt that they found. They found wall murals with Semitic slaves. So is this ultimate proof? I don't think so, but it's an interesting hint. It's an interesting tease. There's the land of Goshen. There's the Nile as it kind of turns into 20 different directions here. By the way, it's a little confusing in Egypt. There's something called Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. I don't know if you've heard those two terms. So we, with our rationality, we look at a map of Egypt, we say, well, this must be Upper Egypt. No, it's the other way around, right? Upper Egypt is here because that's where the Nile River is coming from, and then it moves this way, so it's going down to the sea. So this is Lower Egypt, and then you have Upper Egypt. Never mind, it's probably more information than you wanted. But here's the land of Goshen, right?
Is the Nile the only major river in the world that flows north?
I don't know, that's a good piece of trivia. The only major river, yeah, the Amazon is east.
So.
Yeah.
I think so, but I don't know.
You're right.
Yeah. That's weird. I wonder what... because the Earth spins this way, so maybe that causes more of the rivers to flow that way. So you got the land of Goshen down here, and then, of course, the children of Israel come across here. But you notice, if you read the stories of the coming out, Joshua and all, when they come out of the desert and all, they don't come in the front door, do they? They go around the back door. They go in through the east into the west. Any ideas? I think there's a reason for that, but why don't they just march up the coast here and then come into the land that's been promised to them? Why would they go? Because it looks kind of out of the way. They come down and Moab gives them a bad time, they come up here and then they go across.
To avoid war.
What's that?
To avoid war.
Yeah, this is the highway, right? This is 78. Hope it's not as crowded as the 78, but that's the highway there. Are you really going to take your ragtag group up and down that highway when there could be large armies moving very easily? So what does he do? He gets off the main route, right? He comes around the backside and then enters Canaan from the east, west. By the way, they have, again, this is probably more history than you want to know, but they have all sorts of letters, pleas from the Canaanite kings to the Egyptian king saying, could you please help us? We're being invaded. And it's the time period of Joshua. Is that interesting or what? Now, they don't say Israelites, right? They don't use that term, but they say, help, we're being invaded. You've protected us in the past. Come. We need some help. So these are the Canaanite leaders worrying about that. Then you get to the book of Judges. The book of Judges is awfully frustrating, isn't it? Because the children of Israel again and again do stupid things. Human nature. But they're doing okay, and then they walk away from God, because after all, they're doing okay. Who needs God when things are fine? They fall into a problem. Some group comes in, takes them over, and they cry out to God. God sends them somebody to rescue them. They're called judges. Doesn't mean they're judges like with the white wigs and the black outfits. It's just a tribal leader. And so if you ever heard that word judge, don't think about modern day judges. These are tribal leaders. So they cry out. Somebody rallies them together. Due to God's miraculous intervention, they cast off whatever the tyranny is, and they say, well, thanks, we're okay now. And then they go through this process again and again. So if you read the book of Judges, the book doesn't seem to get anywhere. They have one tribal leader who helps them out, And then that tribal leader fades from the scene. They're in trouble later on. And you could almost pick any part of Judges. It doesn't matter if you start at 6 or 8 or 9. It's going to be the same all the way through. Right? So now we got the people in the land. We got the judges. And you've had that cyclical account in the book of Judges. And Samuel opens up by the people coming to Samuel, who's their prophet. And they're making a request. Anybody know what they're requesting? We want a king. We want a king. Come on, we want to be like everybody else. Well, I can kind of see, I mean, that was obviously the wrong thing to do, but I can see in a way why they're saying that, because they've gone through these judges, right? And it's been kind of a nonstop cyclical thing. We're okay, and then we're bad, and then we're okay. And they go, good heavens, everybody else has got these strong, powerful kingdoms, and we're at their mercy all the time. So they said, Samuel, ask God, we need a king. Samuel says, really? You sure? And he gives us a little speech. This is what the king will do. You really want a king? He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots. He'll take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He'll take 1/10 of your grain and give it to his officials. Your men servants and the best of your cattle he will take for his own use. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief. Yes, I was going to ask, does that sound pretty modern? All the government you're paying for, right? Somebody once said, be grateful you're not getting all the government you pay for. But that's what's going on. It went on in that time. You put somebody in charge, and you lose some of your freedom, and your money, and a lot of other restrictions come along. So it was going on thousands of years ago. Really? You want that kind of stuff? Yes, we do. Okay. So they get their king. Now, the first king was Saul. You know that story about Saul. And Saul is a failure, and along comes David. And I'm not sure as we read the stories of David, if we really appreciate all the things that David represented to those people. He was such a symbol and such an incredible figure that more space is devoted to him than anybody else in the Old Testament. And you say, well, why him? Because he had a good heart? Sure, but look at these other things. He did have a heart for God. He was a great warrior. I mean, look at the things that he accomplished against these groups like the Philistines. He was a political leader. He was their king, for heaven's sakes, for quite a period of time. He's the one who captured Jerusalem. And we know how central that's been to the Jewish nation ever since. He made it the capital. It wasn't a capital, it was just a podunk city, and he said, this is going to be the capital. You know, what he did was kind of what happened with Washington, D.C. You had the northern colonies, you had the southern colonies, and they're bickering and arguing. They said, let's put Washington, D.C., let's create a capital city between the two so we don't get that arguing. It's going to be kind of neutral ground. That's what David did. You had southern tribes arguing with northern tribes. They never got along real well. And they said, let's put Jerusalem and make that the capital in between. So if you look on a map, Judah is south of that, and all the Israel colonies are north of that. He's the one who brought the ark to Jerusalem. He's the one that's given the promise of a Messiah. And he's a writer. What a combination. How many people do you know who are literate and artistic and politically adept and warrior status? I thought about this before I came in today. I thought the only person I can think of is Winston Churchill. He got prizes for his writing. He was a fighter. He actually was in war. Bullets zinged around him. He was captured eventually. He was a political leader. He painted. But it's pretty rare to get somebody like that, so no wonder the Jews loved David. So we got to the time of David. And David's kingdom, if you take a look, this is just a general idea. It's about 1000 BC, if you want kind of a rough time period. We're going to move today through about 1,000 years. So it's going to be a fast tour. But here's David's kingdom in purple. And again, you notice it doesn't slop over into Egypt at all, and it certainly doesn't go into Mesopotamia at all, because you still have kingdoms over there on each side of Israel. But here's the good news for Israel at this time. Neither of these two threats were much of a threat during this time. And so, since both of the Mesopotamian and the Egyptians were a little less militaristic, a little less aggressive, it allowed the people in the middle, in this time period be David, allowed his kingdom to spread. And for his son Solomon as well. So when you hear about Solomon meeting the Queen of Sheba, a lot of people think it was a trade deal. And you can see, I think we talked last time, that the major road would be going up and down the edge of the Mediterranean here. So you had trade going back and forth. Now, if you're Solomon, let's say, you could control those trade routes. You would tax some a caravan that went through, and you tax them, and you tax them, and you tax them. You made a lot of money off of this. And so the kingdom, you know what it's like under Solomon, pretty wealthy. And it was because of the trade, because there was peace. There was not war at this time. So it's a good comment about the value of peace. So Solomon comes along, so now we're in about the 900s BC. He writes Proverbs. And I love the book of Proverbs. I don't know if you like it as much as I do, but I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 things to think about here with the book of Proverbs. That you could spend weeks just doing Proverbs, huh? Look at Proverbs 10:27. I want you to think about this for a second. The fear of the Lord adds length to life, but the years of the wicked are cut short. Now, we could take Proverbs one of 2 ways, couldn't we? We could say every verse is a promise, and it's always going to come true. But if you look at this verse that we just read, do you know any old people who are evil? Yeah, I do. Do you know some really sweet people whose lives have been cut short? Yeah. So what do you think is going on here? Because this seems to claim that the poor, the wicked are going to be cut short and the good people will live forever. Not always true, is it? Proverbs is a general statement of life. It's not a specific promise for every single person. It says, generally this is the way life goes. And so we don't want to take every verse and say, well, God didn't fulfill this. This didn't turn out right. Sure, because this is kind of like do you know what a bell curve is in statistics and all? You know, you have a rarity in one area of the bell curve, and then most people are up here in the bell curve, like height or weight or whatever, and then down here a few more. So this is sort of the bell curve approach in Proverbs. It seems to make general statements about life rather than specifically in every single case to be the truth. Well, unfortunately, after Solomon, you know what happens. The kingdom doesn't stay together. You'd had these internal stresses that have been going on for a long, long time, and finally you got rid of a really strong king in the death of Solomon, and the kingdom just snaps apart. And the northern 10 tribes, which is really confusing, by the way, the northern 10 tribes are called Israel. Well, the whole nation had been called Israel up until then, so now you got to think, wait a minute, what's going on here? So you have 10 tribes up at the top half of the screen there. Down below you have Judah and Benjamin forming the tribe of Judah, forming the nation of Judah. Judah gets to keep the kingdom in Jerusalem. Anybody know what the kingdom becomes as far as the capital for Israel? Yeah, Samaria becomes the capital. So if you ever hear them talk about Samaria, keep that in mind. That's going to be the new key city for the people of the north. You got the Philistines down here, and you got the Phoenicians as well. So into this scene of chaos and fighting and civil war, and in many cases flourishing, in come the prophets. And a lot of people think, oh yeah, the prophets, they come around, they say, hey, let me tell you about the future. Well, that wasn't really the purpose of a prophet, was it? The prophet was to say, thus saith the Lord, I am here from God, I have a message for you. And most of it was, get your act together. Well, what act was going on? Well, if you go back to Exodus, what happened? The children of Israel are miraculously delivered. They get out in the desert. Moses meets God. Moses brings down the 10 Commandments. And they're establishing a Mosaic covenant at that point, aren't they? And it's a two-way covenant. Just like if you write a contract. Think of a covenant like a contract. You go to Home Depot and you say, I want so much carpet. And they say, okay, we'll deliver this carpet X date, but you got to sign for it and you have to pay for it. So you have a responsibility and Home Depot has a responsibility. Well, same thing happened here. This is a Mosaic covenant that the prophets are coming to tell the people about. They're saying, look, you signed a covenant. You said you would do certain things and God would bless you. But if you didn't do those things, God said, look out, right? You're going to get in big, big trouble. So here come the prophets. They're not coming up with anything new. They're just reminding the people, look at that covenant. You signed it. Look at the document, in a sense. Look at your signed agreement. You're not abiding by it. And so the warnings were out there. Well, it didn't take long. Here came the first of the disasters for the nation. It was a group of in the Mesopotamian area that came along called the Assyrians. Nineveh was their capital city. And they were some of the most vicious fighters. Wow, were they unbelievably tough people. It just scared everybody to death. If you saw the Assyrians coming over the hill, it was terrible news because they loved to hurt, they loved to slaughter, they loved to take off people into captivity. You can't see it very well, but up here in the corner are spikes, and they've driven bodies into the spikes. That was their idea of threatening and scaring the people that they were going to come up against, and archers and so on. So what did the Assyrians do? They come over from the north, and they're coming up against Israel initially, the nation of the 10 northern tribes. And they succeed. They wipe out the northern, well, they don't wipe them out, but they take over the northern 10 tribes. And their idea of making subjected people stay in line was to pull out a lot of them out of the land, bring in others who didn't even live there, bring them into the land, so that you couldn't have a real revolution, right? You've pulled off so many people. So what they did is they hauled off the 10 tribes, not everybody, but a good portion of them. They hauled them off. Many of them they put iron hooks around their jaws and dragged them behind horses off to captivity. I mean, it was a vicious group of people. So now you get that story. Anybody ever heard that story of the 10 lost tribes of Israel? I don't know if that's ever been around, but ever since then, people have wondered what happened to the 10 lost tribes, because they don't come back. We'll find out who comes back later, but they don't come back. They're just sent out and go off to different lands that they're not comfortable with, not familiar with, and kind of mix in probably with some of the tribes, the people that they meet there. Omar?
Gary, can we apply what they were doing to what is happening or has happened recently? For instance, the Russians took people out of Estonia and they put a lot of their own people in. They had no problems with Estonia then.
Yeah.
So their doings have been passed down as to things that other nations do and have been pretty successful.
Yeah, you don't have that core of nationalism anymore if you drag off a lot of people. What's there to rally around? That's a good point. So it's been done more than once. So there have been stories. Where did those 10 lost tribes go? And people have romanticized this and turned this into all sorts of crazy fictions. There's a group called British, I won't get the name right, British Anglism or something like that. They felt that the 10 lost tribes had ended up in England. I don't think so, but it made the English feel real good about themselves. We're part of the 10 lost tribes. Nobody knows. They just mixed in with other groups, and they just fade. They disappear from history at that point. Now maybe you can see why in Jesus' day, think about that map again. So you got the 10 tribes have kind of disappeared and they've been mixed in with other groups of people. What did the Jews think of the 10 tribes, that area? They thought of them as mongrels. And so that's where the Samaritans were. So what happens? People would walk, the good Jews in the south would walk around that area. They didn't want to be near those people because they called them dogs and half-breeds and all this kind of stuff. So when Jesus tells that story of the Good Samaritan, it just shocked people to death because the Jews couldn't stand them. They were half-breeds. What are you telling a story about a good half-breed for? Be like us today talking about the good member of Al-Qaeda. I would be horrified to think there's a good member of Al-Qaeda. Well, Jesus' story was the same thing. It all started back here with the Assyrians as they came into the land. Now, what's fascinating to me, at least, about this, because I like history, they don't stop after taking off the 10 tribes, hauling them off. Well, what's the king going to look at next? Those 2 southern tribes. Well, Hezekiah is the king at this point in the south. So he prays to God, please deliver us from these Assyrians. If you want to see some interesting psychological warfare, take a look at 2 Kings sometimes, and the story is repeated in Isaiah, right in the middle of Isaiah. You ever notice that in Isaiah? Isaiah is poetry up to about 36 or 37 chapter, and then it's the story of the Assyrians, and then it goes back to poetry again. It's kind of a weird structure there. Anyway, so Hezekiah is the king at this time. Here come the Assyrians. Take a look sometime at what happens. The representatives, not the king obviously of Assyria, but his representatives come up to the gate in Jerusalem. And they go, hello. And Jews look down. They're not going to open the doors, so they just look down. And they start communicating back and forth. It's too long and too complicated, but really, really interesting. But sometime on your own, take a look, because there's psychological warfare going on at this time. What that representative says to the people of Israel and what they say back. And they don't really want to fight if they don't have to, so they're trying to get the Jews to feel so scared that they'll quit. So if you have a chance, read that sometime. So the Assyrians come. Thank goodness all of these kingdoms do their thing in alphabetical order. Wasn't that nice of them? So the Assyrians are basically like middle 700s, say 750 BC. So just to give you that kind of time period as we're moving down toward the time of Jesus. Well, they fade, and in come the Babylonians. A, Assyrians, B, Babylonians, and then we'll get P, Persians. Isn't that nice? A, B, P, no C. But all right, good enough. I'm satisfied with that. Anything that'll help my mind remember these things. So the Babylonians rise. Now, what have they got left? Just those two tribes. So this king's name is Nebuchadnezzar. And what does he do? He comes over, same thing, comes up from the north, comes down. And I told you before, these little people in Canaan had to watch out and see which side was strongest. Was it going to be Egypt, or was it going to be some land in Mesopotamia? So here comes Nebuchadnezzar. And there's that poor king in Israel looking around saying, well, do we just give in, or do we hope for Egypt's support? Well, he made a really bad choice. He decided Egypt would be strong enough to support me. No, bad choice. Egypt was not strong at this time, so Nebuchadnezzar takes the city over, takes off everything that was of value and just levels the place. And now the southern two tribes are heading off into captivity. And we get this sad, sad song that is in the book of Psalms. Let me just read it. So remember, they've been hauled off because of the Babylonians. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the poplars we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? That's been turned into music, by the way. I don't know if anybody recognizes that, but it's an actual song by the waters of Babylon, by the rivers of Babylon. But isn't that a sad song? They've been hauled off again. Another conqueror has come in and hauled these people off. So I don't know what that would be like. I've grown up in Southern California. I don't know what I'd be like in Iowa or someplace more foreign that was Afghanistan or someplace that's totally a different culture, a different God to worship, different ways of doing anything. You have no sites anymore. You're not where your ancestors were. You can't connect to the land at all. And so they sing a song like this. And to have their captors say, hey, we know you sing some really nice songs. Our songs are done. The harps are being hung up. We don't sing anymore. We're in this land. We're captive. Well, they disappear. Persians come on the scene next. I just wanted to give you an idea of the sweep of the Persian Empire. That's a chunk of real estate, isn't it? Down into Egypt. Again, Egypt was not particularly strong. They took Egypt. They go all the way to India. And what is fascinating to me is this little piece up here. This is northern Greece. But notice this part of Greece is not taken over. Anybody know what was going on in the 400s, let's say, 500 time period, BC? You know anything about the Greeks fighting off the Persians? You know about Thermopylae? Salamis, the naval battle, and things like that. That's what's going on. You got this border area here, and the Greeks refuse to knuckle under to these Persians. They see them as despots and tyrants and running a top-down government. Of course, the Greeks loved the freedom, and they fought among themselves. Wow, they fought themselves more than they fought the Persians. But they said no thanks, and they fought off an entire empire. I mean, that's an amazing period. Supposedly, Xerxes brought over to fight them something like 500,000 troops. And that's why something like Thermopylae was pretty interesting, because they found a spot in the mountains that was a choke point. And the Persians had to come through in a small group at a time to make it through that choke point. So 300 Spartans stand there and fight them off for quite a while until some traitor told the Persians there was a way around the mountain. But so that's where you get these stories of the Greeks standing up to the Persians. So there's this hatred, there's this hostility between the Greeks and the Persians that's developing during this time period. And the Septuagint, I think I mentioned that before. The Greek culture is so powerful and it's all over the place. The Jews say, we need to translate our Bible into Greek so that others can read it and appreciate what we appreciate. And so about 200 BC, the Hebrew Bible gets translated into Greek, and the importance of this is the Bible that Jesus and the disciples refer to. Whenever they quote, they're quoting the Septuagint. So it was a big deal for the time of Jesus. The Apocrypha is written during this time period. Apocrypha means hidden. So these are little hidden works that never reached status of equality with all the books of the Old Testament or all the books of the New Testament. But the Jews thought, some of them are pretty good reading. It's uplifting to the spirit. And the Roman Catholics thought it was uplifting enough that I think they still have it included in their Bibles today. Is that correct? Anybody have a Catholic Bible? The Protestants said no thanks, and so they don't include it in their Bible. Jesus never referred to any of these books. The disciples never referred to any of these books. The Jews did not consider them on an equal status with their books as well. There's the Maccabees story, by the way, taken in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Great history. It's really interesting history. So if you ever have a Bible with a Apocrypha, read the Maccabees story of these little band of revolutionaries that knocked out a whole kingdom and allowed at least a little bit of freedom for the Jews before the Romans came in and took everything down. I chose this map for the Roman Empire because I wanted you to notice something. You see all the red? All those red lines? Looks like a bunch of arteries and stuff. The Romans were great engineers, weren't they? And so they had all these roads, and they had a time of peace called Pax Romana. That was a perfect time if you're going to spread a religion. Paul is able to go everywhere, and other disciples are able to go everywhere because there is peace. There's not a lot of that fighting going on, and the roads were excellent, and the travel by sea was improved. And so it's no wonder that Paul was able to spread this clear into Rome because of the transportation and all. I mentioned the Essenes before. They do play a role, even though they're not mentioned in the New Testament. They lived out in this just hostile place. They were like hermits. They gave up on Jerusalem. They gave up on the priest system there, and they said it's all corrupt. And they went out to live by the Dead Sea. Pretty arid looking, huh? And this is a part of it is being uncovered even to these days. And so they lived these little hermit-like lives out there. And they were the ones, of course, that stuffed away treasured pieces of their scripture when the Romans came through into these caves. And you probably know the story. A little Arab kid is out messing around and is throwing rocks, and he threw a rock into one. I'm not sure that's the first one, but he threw a rock into one of these cave openings from down below, and he hears a ka-chink. That was an odd sound, and so he ends up getting up there, and I don't know how they got up there. It looks pretty scary. But they got up there, and they found these clay vessels inside of which were a lot of writings. Now, some of them had nothing to do with the Bible, but many of them were copies of books of the Bible. And so they're called the Dead Sea Scrolls to these days. So what's the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls as far as the Bible goes? Well, read from top to bottom with me. Most people believe Isaiah was around 700 BC. Before they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, the earliest copy, they didn't have any copy up until around 1000 AD. So what have you got? A time period of 1700 years there between when Isaiah wrote his original and the first copy we have. What do you think the danger might be, or at least the concern some people had?
They wouldn't interpret it correctly. They would do their own thing as time goes on.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine just us, if we write something and then make a copy and then make a copy of that, we start getting sloppier and sloppier, and then things change over time, just in our lifetime. Imagine 700 years and then 1,000 years. 1,700 years altogether. It seems like a lot of translating and copying errors could pop up. So people said, well, we're not sure that that's really what Isaiah said if all we have is a document from the 1000s. So what did they do? They come across a complete manuscript scroll of Isaiah. By the way, that scroll is in Israel today. It's in a separate museum, and you can walk around it. They have it displayed. Have you seen it? Okay, some of you have seen it. Yeah. So that's the scroll of Isaiah. And guess what they discovered? It was from roughly 50 AD. So what have we done? We've cut more than half of that time out, haven't we? We've gone back from 1000 AD down to, let's round off, let's say 0. So you're 1,000 years closer to Isaiah. What's happened? They haven't found any major errors. It's something like 95 or 96% pure. Isn't that amazing? So you say, well, how is that possible? They weren't making Xerox copies. Well, when they copied their Bible, they did it so carefully. We're sloppy copiers today because we say, oh, we've got machines, we can put the documents on computers and all. But they would sit there and they would count how many spaces in each line. They would count how many letters. And then they would make their copy and double check it. And if they had any error any place, they didn't just scratch it out. They threw that away. got a new thing out. They dressed a certain way. They washed before they did it. It was an act of worship to do a copy. And so no wonder it was extremely accurate. So thank goodness, huh?
Yeah.
Let's move to the New Testament. I'm going to spend less time on the Gospels because you're probably most familiar with those. But I think it's interesting that there are 4 Gospels instead of just one story about Jesus. We get, again, the creativity of God saying, go ahead, describe Jesus the way you would like to describe him. And so Matthew sees Jesus as Jewish. And so we get the most references to the Old Testament. And he's always running genealogies back to the time of the Jews. Jesus is a very Jewish Messiah. Mark, fast pace. Luke, a Gentile, Jesus for the entire world. Jesus is the Savior. Luke has many more women in his stories. He probably used Mary as one of the sources. John gives us the gosh wow Jesus, the Jesus of cosmic proportions, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He takes Jesus back to pre-time, doesn't he, with God? And he has some really interesting things to say about him. So we have the 4 different Gospels. Luke wrote 2 books, wrote the book of Luke, and what else? Acts, right. And so people who've been historians and interested in history say, well, can we trust him? Is he a good historian? And he comes across with flying colors. Historian after historian has said, I wanted to, I'm a map person, so I got another map for you here. But I want to illustrate something important. Paul does 3 famous missionary voyages, right? First one, he sticks to Asia. He's in this area, and he goes back. Then, do you remember he has this vision? It's kind of like mid-Acts. He has a vision of a man from Macedon who says, we need you, come on over. So where's Macedon? Up here. And you say, okay, so he went across and crossed a little bit of water to get there. Well, it's more important than that. This, over to the right, is considered Asia. This, over on the left, is considered part of Europe today. So you say, well, what's the difference? This would be like backwoods, rural. It didn't play a huge role in the Roman Empire. Where's the power for the Roman Empire? It's over here. Off the screen, obviously, in Rome. But this is culture. This is civilization. This is advanced thinking from here on over. So when Paul makes that big jump, it's a huge jump when he jumps from here over to here, because now he's entering society. He's entering the high-tech world of that time. So that message then can go a lot faster as he moves into these more powerful areas. You recognize, I'm sure, some of these places where he set up a church and then had to respond to them in some letters. You can see Ephesus there, for example. But look at these over here that he established in the part of the Greek world. Philippi becomes Philippians when he writes to them. Thessalonica, the Thessalonian letters. We get Corinth down here. He does a great sermon in Athens. You familiar with that one? It's a powerful sermon that he gives. So I just wanted you to think about that. Yes, he does 3 trips, and yes, he follows some of the same areas, but it's that big jump when he comes over here where now he's in the downtown area of world civilization. So we got all these letters of Paul in the New Testament. I want you to notice something. You look at that and you go, well, I hope you think about, well, why are they in this order? I think when I was younger, I figured they were chronological. Maybe. But that's not true. Galatians, actually, that 4th one over from the left was his first one. Does anybody notice anything? Let's do it this way. I'm going to read them up to Timothy. So it's Romans, it's Corinthians, it's Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and it's Thessalonians. Do those things have anything in common?
Churches.
They're churches. They're cities where churches were started. All of a sudden, something happens there. Timothy, Titus, Philemon. Are those churches? Those are people. They're called the pastoral letters. So then, all right, so we got a basic division right there, don't we? We've got the letters to the churches, and we got the letters to the individuals. Then when you go back here and you take a look, you notice anything about the size as you move from Romans down to...
You said getting smaller.
Yeah, they're getting smaller, right? We start with the big ones, the biggest, the largest number of chapters and words, and we move to the smaller. And the same thing happens when we go to the Timothys and Titus and Philemon. By the way, nobody ever reads Philemon. That's a great letter. Anybody done that one? You gone through Philemon? It's amazing the psychology that Paul pulls off here, because he's got this runaway slave, Onesimus, and he wants to give him back, but he doesn't want to give him back if the owner, Philemon, is going to do awful things to him. And so Paul's got to write, in a sense, a flattering letter. He's got to write a letter that basically says, you owe me. But he wants to do it in a nice way because he worked with Philemon. Philemon's a Christian. And Onesimus has become a Christian. Do you know there are puns in the letter? Again, if you have a study Bible, you'll love Philemon. It's a great read. But most people ignore it. Let's do that. All right, so does that make sense? We're going actually from largest to smallest as far as the letters to the churches, and largest to smallest letters to the individuals. We have other New Testament letters, of course, Hebrews and James and Peter and John and Jude and Revelation. If that's okay, I want to spend just a second on Revelation. It's really a part of what's called apocalyptic writing. People today, all of us here, we read it and we say, this is weird. This has got all these strange animals, and it just seems kind of odd, and maybe we should not even mess with it. But for the Jews, it was a particular style of writing. It was not unusual to them at all. In fact, it's going to sound weird, but I would suggest it'd be like us reading science fiction today. For some people, they read it and go, that's kind of weird. Well, yeah, but it's a style of writing. And so the same thing was going on there. It's not just Revelation. It's in the Old Testament, parts of Joel, but certainly Ezekiel and Zechariah have the same kinds of writing. It's a style. It's something the Jews were familiar with. Well, what goes on in these books? You get strange beasts. You get nature that actually acts. There's places in Revelation where the earth splits apart and swallows water that's being spewed out by this evil person. You get battle of good against evil. You get, what I think is interesting, you get the known transformed into the unknown. You get a bustling city, but then it's described as if everybody's gone. You get the sun being described as doing something odd. You get the moon turned to blood. You get the stars falling out of the sky. You get all these odd things going on. It's science fiction. Now, I don't mean it's fiction in the sense it's made up, but it has some of those same kind of qualities where you're not comfortable anymore. And I think that was one of the points of writing it. Don't get comfortable. God's bigger. He's going to enter into this world and shake things up. And it certainly has a cosmic setting, doesn't it?
That's our show for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to learn more about Blackstone and Apologetics for Life, please visit our website at apologeticsforlife.org. And we hope to see you next week. Thanks so much for watching.